Gentlemen, thanks. Right here is the GCF, 3y squared. Gentlemen. Grace, thanks. 3y squared is the GCF. The leftovers would be y squared plus 6y minus 16. And walking around, I feel like we're getting the hang of that for the most part. I know we're not probably perfect, but we're getting really, really close. So this is what we covered on, I guess it was last week, last couple of times as well. This is GCF. What we did last time, what we did yesterday in class, is how we're going to finish with this. So step 2, this is where we're going to finish this one off. Step 2 is to factor the trinomial that is left over. So if you look at the inside there, you've got 3y squared, but then inside the parentheses, you've got a trinomial. So this is where yesterday we used that magic x idea. You remember that? So if you would, start off where we are right there, 3y squared times the y squared plus 6y minus 16. See if you can use the magic x to completely factor the trinomial as well, and at that point we'll be done, okay? So you can head back to the boards, you can do little whiteboards, you can work on your notes. Let's see if we can finish it off with the magic x. Ready to go. The idea here is this. You guys factored out the GCF, and like I said, for the most part, we got that 3y squared factored out of there. You did a great job. Now what I want to do is see if we can break this down a little bit further. I used the words factor completely, and so we're going to now take a hard look at this trinomial that was left over, and we're going to ask ourselves, could the trinomial be factored again? Right? So this would be like a second stage of factoring to break it down even further. And so I'm going to look at that y squared plus 6y equals, or minus 16, and I'm going to identify my b and my c. So our standard form, I'll just write it down here, I'll erase it in a second, x squared plus bx plus c. So in this case, what is our c value?
Negative 16.
Remember the sign goes with the number? Yeah, so c would be negative 16. And what is the b value? 6. Okay, so I'm going to erase this. We're going to use those two values. Yes, ma'am?
Can I please go to the bathroom?
Of course. We're going to use those two values in our x, our magic x idea here. And so the magic x, we put the c in the top, and we put the b in the bottom. And this is where we ask ourselves, and we can list some numbers out if we want to, if we're having a hard time figuring out what numbers are which. We're going to ask ourselves, which two numbers multiply to be negative 16 and add to be 6? Let me show you a graphic I didn't show you yesterday. If you're having a hard time figuring this out, you could start listing out the factors of negative 16. So for instance, if you wanted to, you could say, well, I know that 4 times negative 4, I know that that equals negative 16, right? But what's 4 plus negative 4? Not 6, right? So then maybe you think of some different numbers. You're thinking, well, what else multiplied together gives me 16? And you might think negative 8 times 2, that would give me negative 16 for a product, right? But when you add those up, what do you get? Negative 6, and I wanted positive 6, so now we're getting really close. So maybe here we say, hey, you know what? If we just made this a positive 8 and add a negative 2, that would work. And sure enough, that does work. So our values in our magic x would be 8 and negative 2. So then for my final step, I would write out the full factoring. I would write it out as 3y squared times y plus 8 times y minus 2. So notice the final factoring includes all three factors. The 3y squared is still in there. It didn't disappear. We just didn't work with it there for a second because we only wanted to focus on the trinomial. But then when we write out our full factoring there in the end, it includes all three factors, all the elements in there. Ashlyn. It doesn't. Yeah, because it's multiplication is commutative. You could flip the order around. I'd say this is like the normal way to write it. But if you did like y plus 8 times 3y squared times y minus 2 or something like that, totally fine. I don't know why you would write it that way, but if you did, it's no problem at all. Yes. Okay. Anybody else with a question? I'm going to get a lot more chance to practice factoring here. And we're going to do it now unless there's nobody else. Okay, cool. As you saw, some of you saw from my email, I think we're about like 65% of you guys were engaged with the intro video for today. And so we're going to get a chance to practice that material. And if you didn't watch the intro video, you can always go back and watch that. You can get late credit for it if you want. It would definitely be worth your while. Here's the intro video material, and I want to just kind of piggyback off this a little bit. We're going to continue. And guys, yesterday we did this. We're going to do this today. We're going to do this again tomorrow. We're going to continue to factor trinomials. One difference, and I say the one difference, I mean it, there's only one difference, and it's this. Yesterday, the coefficient on the x squared was always 1. Today, we're going to allow for the possibility for it to not be a 1. Okay? So if you have not watched the intro video, you might want to go back. You're going to see a technique, a method here. And by the way, I do have other techniques. I actually have some other techniques that are pretty tricky and neat and everything, but people tend to not retain them very well because they are just like sort of tricks. And, you know, if I need to pull those out at some point, I can. I don't really like to just because people tend to not retain them. They just think of it as a trick they don't understand. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a couple of practice problems. I'm going to, just out of, in the interest of folks that maybe didn't watch the video, I'm going to do my best to kind of help you go through this method right here. And we're going to start with number 2. And I think you're going to find some similarities between what we did yesterday and this with some important differences as well. So here we go with number 2. Okay. I'm going to be really precise and use the best possible language that I can, but if anything seems confusing, please ask. Do not just sit there and think, duh, I don't want to ask. I'm going to do my very best. So please pay attention. Here we go. So number 1, as we check this out, here this question number 2, we check this out. We notice it's a trinomial and it says factor completely. And I want you to notice this right away. That coefficient on the m squared, or often it'll be an x squared, the coefficient is not a 1. And so we want to really pay close attention to this. So since the coefficient is not a 1, we're going to think of this as ax squared plus bx plus c, with x being kind of the typical variable. I understand that it's an m right now. And based on that, we want to identify as clearly as we can the a, the b, and the c. Identify the a, the b, and the c. Yesterday, the a was always 1, so we didn't really worry too much about that. Today, the a could be other stuff, so we're going to be a little more focused on that. So what do you guys think? What is the a value for this one?
5.
The a value is 5. The c, or the b value, excuse me,
Negative 22.
negative 22, and the c value, negative 15. Okay, so I'm going to erase that basic framework right there. And now we're going to find one other important number, and we're going to use that with our magic x to get us going. So the key number here for us to put into our magic x is going to be a times c. So I'm going to write that down here, a times c. In this case, what is a times c? 5 times negative 15, and that would be? Negative 75. Okay. So far, so good? Here's what we do. We're going to go back to our magic x, and this is going to feel a lot like what we did yesterday. So with our x, this time I am going to put the AC in the top. And technically we were doing that yesterday. Since a was always 1, we were putting AC in the top as well. So negative 75 goes in the top. And b goes in the denominator, or not the denominator, excuse me, the bottom of the x. So I've got a negative 75 in the top, and I've got a negative 22 in the bottom of the x. Please don't get too far ahead of me. You might mistakenly do something wrong. I want you to be careful with this. We do need to treat this x the same way we did yesterday. We want to ask ourselves, which two numbers multiply to be negative 75 and add to be negative 22? And this could be hard, right? Negative 75 is a fairly big number. Any ideas on which numbers multiply to be negative 75? Yeah, Connor.
Negative 25 and 3.
All right, so if we try that out, I'll put a negative 25 here and a 3 here. We always want to check this to make sure that it actually does make sense. So negative 25 times 3, is that really negative 75?
Yeah.
It absolutely is. And what about negative 25 plus 3? He got it, right?
Wow.
So this is where maybe your calculator really comes in handy for you. You might need to run through a couple of numbers and be like, what plus what is this, and what times what is that, right? You might need to do that a few times, and if you do, that's no problem. But Connor, nice job, identified it for us. All right, so here's what we do. This is where this is a little bit different. We have to pay close attention to the fact that the a value was not 1, it was 5. So we have to use a slightly different technique moving forward. Here's what we do. I am going to take 5m squared, leave it as is. This method, I call this split the b, because what we're going to do is we're going to take that b term and we're going to split it up based on our magic x. So I'm going to write it like this: minus 25m plus 3m minus 15. Now, where are we getting those numbers from? We're getting them directly from the magic x. And check this out. This negative 25, that's where I got that from. You see it? So I got the negative 25 from the magic x, and so I'm going to put negative 25m, and the 3 from the magic x is right there. So all I'm doing, if you think about this, stop and think for a second. What's negative 25m plus 3m? Negative 22m, right? So have I really changed the value of this at all? I haven't changed it at all. What I've done, though, is I've split that b up into a nice split that's going to help us here in a second get some good factoring. Make sense? That's called split the b. Any questions at all? Okay. And by the way, if later on you're working on your WebAssign, you're working on a question like this, you're like, oh my gosh, I remember this split the b thing in the x and I forgot how to do it, I'm making a video right now. Feel free to go back and watch. You can hear me, you can see this, you can hear a question you might have, you can kind of review and relearn a little bit, okay? So here's how we do this as far as finishing this off. I am going to take the first two terms and group them, and the second two terms and group them as well. And by grouping, of course, I mean parentheses. So put parentheses around the first two, parentheses around the second two. All right, the way we finish this off is we're going to factor the GCF, and then we're going to factor the GCF again. So check this out. Look at the first grouping. What do you guys think the GCF is in that first grouping? Isn't it 5m? Do you see how just in the first grouping there's a common 5 factor, and both terms have an m? So let's do that. So I'm going to write 5m, and then if I did factor a 5m out of the first grouping, what's left over for the first term? There would just be a single m, and what about the second term? Minus, specifically minus 5, right? Yeah, negative 5. Okay? So now we're going to do the exact same sort of thing with the second grouping, 3m minus 15. So what's the common factor there?
3.
There's a 3, right? And that's it. There's no other common integer factor. So we're going to factor out a 3. So it's going to be plus 3. And if I did factor that 3 out, what would be left over for the first term? And then minus 5. Okay, we're almost done. Now, I've got one term here, I've got another term there. What's in common between those two terms? Don't they have an m minus 5? And so I'm going to think of that as another GCF I can take out of the whole thing. So now as I factor that out, m minus 5 is factored out. On that first term, if I factored out the m minus 5, what's left over? Not nothing.
5m.
5m. And on the second term, if I factored out the m minus 5, what's left over?
3.
Plus 3. And I've got it. What to do with this in number 2. Let's see. Let's see how if you guys can adopt to this a little bit early. Okay, see if you can do this. If you can't, I'm not that worried about it. It's going to take a little while. See if you can do number 3, okay? Ready, set, go. Work together. I'll be around to help you. Let me get this up on screen a little bit better. There we go. Let's make sure you're good on this, right? We're kind of building this up. Realize we're not going to be perfect right away. Let's identify our A, B, and C. What is our A value? A value is 6. How about the B value? And the C value? Okay, you guys all okay with identifying those? When you're in descending order, it's pretty clear. All right. And then the key number that we're going to use here is the AC. And AC would be 18. So we got to figure these numbers out. Sounds like you're doing okay. Any questions on any of those? Okay, now as far as the magic X goes, the 18 goes in the top. The B goes in the bottom, negative 11. And this is where we ask ourselves, what two numbers multiply to be 18 and add up to be negative 11? What'd you come up with? Negative 9 and negative 2, or you could say negative 2 and negative 9. Okay. So I've got those right there. I want to just stop right here. Do you have any questions so far? So far, so good. Where are we at? Seriously, this is where you say, where'd the 18 come from? I don't get the negative 2. Whatever. Nobody? Okay. So, I'm going to help you split the B. Cole, you with me, bud?
Yeah.
Awesome. You ready?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't like writing.
So this is where this particular one has a little bit of a trick to it. I don't know if it's a trick. You just want to be really careful. Do you guys remember what the next step is after you split that B up? After you split the B, what do you do?
I remember.
You group. Yep, you group the first two, and you group the second two. So I've grouped the first two terms. I've grouped the second two terms. And this is where you have to be ultra careful.
Wait, actually, I do have a question.
Don't interrupt. This is where you have to be ultra careful. Do you guys understand that when you have parentheses butted up against each other, what that really means? And that's not what this really is. And so what symbol could I put between there that'll make it not multiplication? A plus sign would be most wise. Grace, question.
Yeah, so would it matter if you,
Oh, the negative 2a, negative 9a, like the ordering on that?
Yeah.
It doesn't matter. Our answers, our procedures might look a little different on the intermediate steps, but it doesn't matter at all. Ashley.
I'm just gonna write it again, so I'm ready.
Always put a plus sign. So if you group, always put a plus sign. Okay, so what follows here is we need to factor out the GCF. What is the GCF on that first grouping? 2 and, there's a 2 and an A, right? So we factor out a 2A. What's left over if we factor that out?
3A minus A.
Not 3A minus A.
3a plus a, 3a plus negative a.
Nope.
3a minus 1.
Wouldn't it be 3A minus 1? Didn't we factor out the whole term? Remember, if you factor out the whole term, the leftover is a 1. And then what is the GCF on that second set of parentheses? There's kind of two ways you could answer this. 3 or?
2.
No, not 3 or 2. 3 or?
4.
Negative 3. Grace, please look.
Sorry, I was looking.
Over here, between the negative 9 and the 3, there is not a common 2 or a common 4. There is a common 3, right? 3 goes into both 9 and 3. And like I said, you have a choice. You could do 3 or negative 3. Negative 3 is the right choice, and let me explain why. Minus 3, parentheses, the leftovers would be 3a minus 1. So if you look at it from this perspective, do you see how the two binomials left over are the same? That's exactly what we want. And so that's why we'd factor out a negative 3 instead of a positive 3. If I factored out a positive 3, the binomials wouldn't match and this wouldn't work. Factor out a negative 3, it does. Okay? And then finally, if I look at these two binomials right here, or these two terms right here, do you see how they both have that binomial in common? So we would factor that out. I would get 3a minus 1, factor it out. The leftover here would be 2a. The leftover here would be minus 3. And I'm done. And again, if you went through this process and you're like, man, that was really tough, maybe you have the right answer, you should absolutely always refoil this back out to check. So if we did that, 3a times 2a is 6a squared. 3a times negative 3 is negative 9a. Negative 1 times 2a is negative 2a. Negative 3 times negative 1 is plus 3. And you can probably see this is going to work out well as far as checking that goes. That's the original. Okay? So this will definitely take practice. This will definitely take work to do. Let's see. We got about 5 minutes left. And why don't we see if you guys can cap today off with one more effort and hopefully do great. I think you probably can. So let's try. Hang on. Let's try this one. I have no idea. I really don't. Check your Schoology.
No, I did. I'm just not sure if it's on this concept.
Say one more time.